I'm ZeBenko. I'm an admin over at the Dragon Ball DUBS Discord server. You may know me for some things outside of that, but that's not really important today. This video is to show you how to sync audio with Premiere Pro. There are a multitude of ways you can sync audio. You can use Audacity, Vegas, DaVinci Resolve, but I personally use Premiere Pro. Sometimes I'll use Audacity for certain things, but most of the time I stick to my tried and true Premiere. So I'm going to go ahead and boot up Premiere and we'll go ahead and get started. So if you are in our server and you have offered to sync audio, then you have already seen the initiation test. You should have already read all of this here. So you want to click on this link, and this link, and it will take you to these Google Drive pages, and you'll want to download all of these. So as you can see, I already did that, and I have them here. So once you have those downloaded and you have a version of Premiere open, we can get started. It doesn't matter what version of Premiere that you use. I would prefer a more recent one, but really at the end of the day, as long as it can export audio losslessly, then you're probably in the clear. So you want to create a new project. You can set the destination to wherever you want it to go. Me personally, I'm going to go ahead and put it on my desktop, and we will just name it Italian episode 120 and create. Now, for our purposes today, I will be assuming that you already know how to use Premiere. If you don't, then there are hundreds upon thousands of videos on YouTube to teach you how to do it. But just as a basic overview, when you first boot up Premiere, it may look something similar to this, but you may have a bunch of extra stuff on the sides and all that. You don't really need all that. You can just go to the top, right click the panel, and then hit close panel, and it will close all of the unnecessary stuff that you don't want. The main things that you want are this panel up here, this panel over here, which will have your video preview, your media, and your timeline. You can arrange this however you want. You can drag these over here and like place them in whatever spots you want to place them. It doesn't really matter how you do it. And you can like adjust the sizes and all that, but I won't get too deep into the weeds on that. You can customize Premiere in a bunch of different ways and do it however you want. But for our purposes, I'll be keeping things very vanilla. This is how I tend to prefer Premiere to look. But if you don't have any of this stuff open, you can just go to this tab up here that says Window, and you can select all the basic stuff that you see here. So let's go ahead and import these here into Premiere. We'll start with the video. This is just raw Cetamite Dragon Box footage from the merge. Okay, let's go ahead and put in our Japanese audio up here. Make sure that this is extended all the way to the left. Make sure those numbers say 00 when you're dragging it to the left so that you know it's linked up properly. Now, you can do this if you want, it doesn't really matter, but I personally like to color code my Premiere audio so that I know what is what and what I'm working with. But for this, I probably won't really need that. And then you'll want to go ahead and import the Italian audio. So yeah, you can see that the Italian audio is really long and has a bunch of unnecessary stuff that we do not want. That's because this is a DVD remix of the Italian dub, and this includes, I believe, 3 episodes in one file. So in order to get to the proper episode, which is episode 120, you can take a look at these waveforms and see that this is the opening. And if you look at the video preview, this is where the opening ends, so this is where the actual episode starts. You can see that these waveforms line up pretty dang well. So you can make assumptions on what parts of the episodes are what. Like here at the end, you can see that that is definitely Zenkai Power, the ending song, and this is definitely the next episode preview. And judging by how this waveform looks and how long it is, you can make a judgment that that is the opening for the next episode, which you would be correct if you listen. So we can go ahead and line that back up over here. You can see that it lines up again, ED, ED, NEP, NEP. And here we have another opening. So we can go ahead and trim it again, drag that all the way back over to the left, We can see again. Okay, so I was wrong. There's actually 4 episodes on this. That's interesting. You can see ED, ED, NEP, NEP. Cut all the way to the end again. We got the opening. And now, this should be the episode that we're working with. So you can see it still lines up. ED, ED, NEP, NEP. So now let's go back to the start. Let's go ahead and line up the opening. So you can see here, this is where the opening starts in Japanese. This is where the opening starts in Italian. So our Japanese track, I would recommend clicking this right here, toggle lock. That'll lock the track so that we cannot do anything to it whatsoever, because you do not want to move the Japanese track. The Japanese track should stay perfectly still and never move under any circumstances, because that is what you're syncing your audio to. So you can see here, it starts here earlier in Japanese, so let's go ahead and trim down Italian some more. And let's line it up. See, that's pretty close. So one thing I would recommend doing is right-clicking your little ruler tab up here and hitting Show Audio Time Units. This will allow you to make much more precise audio movements. So you can see here, we can zoom in way far. However, if we undo that, you can see that we are now going by video frames. So instead of going by audio time codes, we're going by frames of the video that we're working with, which is not as useful. You can see here, if I try to move it to the right a little bit more, it goes too far to the right. If I try to move it to the left a little more, it goes too far to the left. However, if we turn on Show Audio Time Units, we can move it much, much more precisely. So yeah, let's just try and line this up with the Japanese a little bit better. You can see these two waveforms are pretty similar, so let's try and get those. That looks pretty dead on to me. Let's go ahead and extend this back. Let's listen. Oh yeah, I would recommend soloing, solo track the Italian so that you're not always listening to both. But I would also recommend toggling it off in certain occasions so that you know, like when you're listening to something like the OP, which should be the same audio track in both, that it is perfectly lined up. So let's like skip to the end of it here. You can see it's still lined up pretty dang well. It's not perfect, it's a little bit ahead, but here's a little rule of thumb I would recommend. Go by milliseconds. So you can see over here these little numbers. If you're going by audio time units, you should have an option between audio samples and milliseconds. In this case, you'll want to go by milliseconds for just a second, so instead of going by audio time units, you're now going by milliseconds. And what I would recommend doing is, you can see this waveform here resembles this waveform here, so those are probably the same thing. So let's just zoom in a little bit. So 653 is where this is at. 653 is where that is at. So you can see that they are not even a millisecond apart, which is good because you don't want your audio. This is a general rule of thumb that I recommend to everyone who is syncing audio. Do not let your audio go beyond 11 milliseconds out of sync. 11 or 12 milliseconds is usually the maximum I will allow for an audio to be either ahead or behind the audio you're syncing it to. And you can see in this particular case, it's not even 1 millisecond out of sync, which is so inconsequential that no one is ever going to notice. So in this case, the opening is perfectly fine. However, if we skip over here to when the episode actually starts, you can see that it is pretty dang out of sync. So you can see we are currently at 975. Let's skip forward. We are several hundred milliseconds out of sync, so we need to line that up better. So what we'll do is we'll grab our little razor tool here. you can either click on the button or press C on your keyboard. And we'll make a cut somewhere in this empty space. It doesn't really matter where you make the cut, just make the cut somewhere. In this example, I'll do it here. And then we are going to move the track to the left. Since this is all just empty, blank channel space, it doesn't matter if we cut it out or not. And now we can just line this up a bit better. Oh, right. This is something I often forget to do, but if you're like checking your milliseconds to see how out of sync something is and you try to go back to actually syncing the audio, always remember to go back to audio samples. That'll make your syncing much more precise. That's something I often forget to do, so yeah, you can see it's lined up quite a bit better. I think 1 audio sample to the left, 2. Yeah, that's better. Now, sometimes you'll have like these little gaps in your audio that you'll do because sometimes you moved it too far to the left and then, oh, I gotta move it back. Yeah, that'll leave these little blank spaces. You don't want to leave these blank spaces in your audio because that'll leave a jarring little blip in your audio. So you'll want to either fill it in with the previous clip or with your current clip. Doesn't really matter which you do. Just fill that in with something. And now it should be perfect. So let's go ahead and skip to the end of the last episode preview. You can see this is where the title card is at. You got this little da-da-da-da-dun-dun-dun-dun. So let's see. You can see that these two are the same blip. Let's check and see how out of sync that is. 657. 666. That is almost 10 milliseconds out of sync. So since we're not quite 11 milliseconds out of sync, I think it would be a good idea to make a cut here. So you can see that most of this is just like empty space. Until it goes silent, so you can just make a cut there. And then you can line this back up better. Remember to go back to audio samples. Look for any gaps that you may or may not have left. And that should be good.
Un altro Super Saiyan.
Now, something else I recommend looking out for is voices. Now, in very rare circumstances, oftentimes we will tell you ahead of time about this, but sometimes in some dubs, the voices and SFX are going to be out of sync with each other. And that is a problem with the mastering of the audio. With the Italian dub, thankfully this is not the case, so the voices and the SFX do line up pretty dang well. However, that does not apply to all dubs of Dragon Ball, and sometimes the voices are shifted a little bit ahead or a little bit behind the SFX. But our general rule of thumb for dubs, the rare case of dubs where they are out of sync, is if it is an action scene, you sync by SFX. However, if it is a scene prioritizing voices and a lot of talking and dialogue, then obviously you would prioritize the voices. And you'll want to do that scene by scene. So basically, when you shift from one scene to another, make a cut. That will hopefully line up the audio better depending on what the scene calls for.
Che cosa intende dire, terrestre?
Voglio dire che sono qui per sterminarvi.
Come per sterminarci? Tu che cosa ne pensi, padre?
Now, most of this scene at the beginning of episode 120 is just talking, so you can probably skip over a lot of that because talking is very subjective when it comes to dubbing. So you can see here, if we skip to like this SFX here, it's a little bit ahead. So that means most of everything that came before that is also just a tiny bit ahead. However, because most of that was talking, you don't really notice it.
Tanto fra poco non sarete più in grado di nuocere.
Like, just watch it.
Tan-
Trunks' voice lines up almost exactly with that lip flap. If you were just watching it, you wouldn't even notice it.
Tanto fra poco non sarete più in grado di nuocere.
So with talking, it's really subjective, and you'll just have to use your best judgment there. However, when it comes to SFX, it's a lot more objective, and there are certain things that you are going to want to line up better. So say for example, we're about 4 minutes into the episode, I think it calls for another cut to be made. We can make a cut right here since it's all just extraneous silence and wind and all that. You can see it's a little bit ahead. Let's see how far ahead it is. Let's take this. This would be better. 419. 426. It's still not that out of sync, but I do like to make things line up a little bit better when it comes to moments that happen spontaneously like this. You can see that there's a moment of silence, and then it's just a powerful SFX. That is a good point in which you want to sync up your audio. So we'll go over here, and we'll line up this SFX. That looks pretty good to me. Look for any gaps or anything like that. And you want to listen to your cuts. Don't just make a cut and don't listen to it. You want to listen to your cuts to see if there's like a little pop or a crackle in there. Let's move it back. Yeah, you can hear that. If you're wearing headphones, it's much more obvious. There's like a little thud. That's because of the cut that we made. So, we can just add this constant power effect over it, bandage it a little bit, listen, and that thud is no longer there. Now obviously you can mess around with it some more. You can move it over here, see if that sounds better, add your own bandage to it, adjust the bandage however you want. Just use your best judgment to determine what you think sounds best. But in my case, I think that sounds good. Now, since a lot of this is just regular action that we pretty much already synced up, you can skim over it. Maybe stop here and there to listen.
Ma, signore, cosa ha fatto?
Okay, I think this is all pretty good. So there are a couple of points in an episode where I would recommend checking your sync. So obviously you'll want to line up the OP, then you'll want to line up the beginning of the LEP, or last episode preview. Then I would recommend making another cut to line up the title card if possible. Sometimes the music from the LEP bleeds into the title card, so, you know, trying to line up the title card can be a bit of a challenge, but if it is possible, I would recommend doing it. If it's not possible, then it's kind of whatever. But there is often enough space between the title card and the actual episode to make a cut to adjust the actual episode. After that, most of the first half of the episode should be perfectly fine, assuming you're working with an audio that's not all that bad. Then I would recommend skipping to somewhere in halfway through the episode where the eye catch shows up. The eye catch is where you want to really make sure that your audio is still in sync. You can see here that it's a bit ahead, so we can go ahead and make a cut here at the beginning of the next eye catch. because the eye catches are where audios tend to differ between a lot of dubs. This is where a film reel change is in a lot of dubs. And because there's a film reel change here, that means that the timing can be a bit different between a variety of dubs. Sometimes other dubs keep one more frame, sometimes they keep 2 frames, sometimes they don't keep the eye catches at all and you have to replace those. Whatever the case, you'll want to check the eye catches to see if they are lined up. You can see in our case it's a bit behind, so we will go ahead and line that back up a little bit better. That seems good to me. You see a little black space there. Let's fill that in. You can hear that thud there, but that wasn't ours. That's just a part of the audio. Regular audio, things like that just happen in the audio inherently, I wouldn't really bother trying to fix those. If they happen, then it just kind of is what it is. But you can tell that little thud there wasn't our cut, because you can hear it happen before we even get to our cut. And our cut is already pretty seamless, so I wouldn't bother putting a bandage over it.
Che aura terribile!
Oh no, che cosa succede? È la stessa cosa che è capitata su una Mac! Deve trattarsi di papà. Davvero?
So I would check maybe halfway through the second half, check for any SFX and all that. This is all voices.
Comunque la vittoria è nelle mie mani.
Ne ho abbastanza delle tue frottole mocciose! Prendi questo! Fermo!
Yeah, you can tell that's pretty out of sync. So let's go back. Check and see. So I think this is where our issue is. There's some silence here, and that's obviously not in the Japanese, so if we unlock the Japanese and listen to it, the music fades into the episode, but in Italian the music completely fades out, and then it transitions to the episode. So that tells me that the audio is probably slightly mistimed. So let's try and line this up. Let's look for an SFX or something like that. Or we can look for a music cue as well. Right here. This is a good point. You can see it's a little bit behind. There we go. That's a lot better. Doesn't have to be perfect, just as close as you can get it. You can see there's all this empty space here. Let's try and fill some of that in.
No!
Altro Super Saiyan. Non può essere.
Let's go back to that point further ahead that we were looking at. Now you can see that's lined up a lot better. It's still a little bit ahead, but it's pretty good. Until most of that there is just kind of silence, is fading away, so we can make a cut there. And we can move this back just a smidge. I think that's pretty seamless. Okay, let's go ahead and skip towards the ending song. Let's listen to this. Yeah, you can see it's a little bit ahead, so we'll probably want to make a cut a little bit earlier. Let's look for a decent point. You can probably make a cut right here. That seems like some decent empty space. Make a cut there. Let's go back over here and line some of this up. Alright, I told myself this earlier, we're still going by milliseconds. We need to go by audio samples. You see, it happens to the best of us. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's go back over to this cut that we made. You can see that there's some blank space there. Let's fill that in. Just listen to it.
Era una battuta. Una battuta. Battuta. Battuta.
To me, that cut sounds good. So you can probably just go back ahead. We'll see how it is now. Still a little ahead, but most of it is just music and all that. Let's see. 272, 282. We're only 10 milliseconds out of sync, roughly. So I think we're still in the clear. And I think that concludes the main episode itself.
È addirittura più forte di Goku. Riuscirà a sconfiggere anche Recold?
See, the ED is a little bit out of sync, so let's go back to audio samples. Let's make a cut here. Fill in that blank space. Cut is seamless. Now the ED is all lined up. Let's go over to the NEP. You can see that the NEP is a little bit ahead, so let's make another cut here in this empty space. That's pretty good. Fill in the space. So there's some static there, so I'll just try and do it before the static. There we go. There's some extraneous noise there, so we can just cut that off a bit early. You can tell that it's that the end is a little bit abrupt because of all that hissing. So we can probably just add a fade here. We can use constant power and then just fade it off right as the NEP is ending. Right about here or so. You can do that kind of stuff if you want. It doesn't really matter, but I like to do it because it makes it sound just a tiny bit better. And with that, the audio is good. So, like I said, I would recommend these syncing points right after the OP, right after the title card, halfway through the first half of the episode, the eye catch, halfway through the second half of the episode, right before the ending song, and right before the next episode preview. Those are my main syncing points I would recommend to check. Once you sync all those up, your episode should be more or less done and no more than 11 milliseconds out of sync. So yeah, if you were having any trouble understanding what we meant by syncing audio, or if you didn't understand what syncing audio is or what the purpose of it is, it's pretty much just lining up your audio to another audio perfectly, or at least as close as perfect. And yeah, that's about it. You want to make sure that you have your track that you're syncing soloed. Go to export. Go to waveform audio. and you want to pull down this drop down menu for audio. For audio codec, hit uncompressed, and now these are all going to differentiate between the audio that you are working with. In our particular case, we're working with Italian. So we'll right click Italian, go to media info. If you don't have media info installed, I would recommend getting media info. It's a very helpful tool, and you're going to need it for the projects that we are doing. Hit media info on the Italian track, and you can see that it says that it is 48 kilohertz, 16 bits, and that it has 2 audio channels, so it's stereo. Some audios are going to be mono, some audios are going to be 48 kilohertz, some are going to be 44.1. It all depends. So for whatever audio that you are syncing, you are going to want to check the media info for that audio and determine what it is. Now, in our case, it specifically defines the bit depth. On a lot of audios, it will not define the bit depth. However, if it does not define it, it is 16-bit audio. If it doesn't tell you, hey, this is 16 bits, or hey, this is 32-bit audio, or this is 8-bit audio, if it doesn't tell you any of that, then just assume that the audio is 16 bits. However, if it does tell you, hey, this audio is 8 bits, this audio is 32 bits, you will want to keep that in mind, and you'll want to adjust it accordingly. 32, 24, 16, 8. You'll want to determine between these. Check the audio. But like I said, if it doesn't say specifically what bit depth the audio is, assume 16 bits. But in our case, it specifically defines it because it's a uncompressed WAV audio. So it's 16 bits, 48 kilohertz, 2 audio channels, in other words, stereo. And that is our settings here. So if it is 41, so for example, if the media info said 44.1 kilohertz, you want to do 44.1. Basically, whatever the media info says it is, you'll want to replicate on these settings here. Now you can go ahead and set it to whatever destination you want it to go to. For me, I'll just save it to my desktop. Export. And it should be done. You can listen to it and make sure that it's all proper and all that. You can even open up MKV Toolnix and then mux it to the Dragonbox video that we gave you. You can do whatever you want to make sure that your sync comes out proper. But really, at the end of the day, all we really need is the audio, so you can either send us the WAV, or if you feel like saving some space, you can encode it to a level 8 FLAC. To do that, you can either use FFmpeg or Shutter Encoder or Media Human. Basically, anything that uses FFmpeg to encode, you can use. But for this, I will show you how to do it specifically with FFmpeg. So, you want to right-click the exported sync audio, go to Media Info. You want to copy the path that it's saved to. So this little section here that says complete name, you'll want to copy that. So copy. And obviously you're going to want to make sure that you have FFmpeg installed on your computer. It's very simple and easy to do. But assuming that you already do, go ahead and open a CMD prompt by hitting the Windows key and typing in CMD. So what you want to do once you have the CMD prompt open, you'll want to do FFmpeg -I, quote, paste the file directory that we just copied, quote, dash compression underscore level space 8. After that, space, quote, paste in the file directory. Once you paste it in, go back 3 spaces, delete the WAV, and replace it with FLAC. After that, hit quote again, and then press enter. This will use FFmpeg to encode the WAV file to a level 8 FLAC file, which will keep it lossless but also save you some space. So you can see it's 86.3 megabytes now instead of 270 megabytes, but it is still lossless. And you can go ahead and send this FLAC file to us however you please. If you want to send it through a Google Drive, or you can use WeTransfer, or you can just send it over through Discord if you have Nitro. It doesn't really matter how you do it, so long as we get the audio file somehow, then you're good. And that's pretty much all there is to it. I hope you found this video informative and that you stay with us for the long term, and we hope to hear more from you, and we'd love to see you in on some of our projects. I've been ZeBenko, and thank you for watching.